I remember the exact moment everything fell apart. Lauren stood in our living room with a suitcase, her face cold and decided. We'd been married for 10 years, but I barely recognized the woman I'd promised my life to. She told me she was leaving for Blake Thornton, some entrepreneur she'd met 3 months ago. She sneered that she deserved better than this life and walked out without waiting for a response. The door slammed so hard the picture frames rattled. I stood frozen, feeling everything collapse at once. Humiliation burned through me. Heartbreak crashed down like a wave. How had I missed this? How had 10 years meant so little? My best friend, my partner, my wife, gone, chasing money and status with a stranger. I realized that I had no idea who Lauren Whitaker really was anymore. The woman who'd promised forever had just chosen temporary wealth over real love. The cruelty of it would haunt me for weeks. Looking around the empty living room, I understood that my life had fundamentally changed in a single moment. Everything I'd believed about our marriage was now a lie. That moment felt like the end of the world, but I didn't know then that it was actually the beginning of my salvation. In the silence that followed her departure, I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a sound that had always comforted me but now felt like a countdown to my new reality. That first night, I sat in the dark. No crying, no anger, just numb silence. I got up and walked to my office, opening the filing cabinet in the back corner. I pulled out a folder I'd labeled, "Just in Case," months ago. Inside were documents I'd been quietly collecting, receipts from hotels, credit card statements, screenshots of text conversations, records of late-night calls to unknown numbers. I'd started gathering these things when I first sensed something was wrong. Now, looking through everything, I saw the pattern clearly. The seeds of betrayal had been planted long ago. I wasn't shocked by what I saw. Instead, I felt something colder than shock. I felt prepared. I realized I'd always known, deep down, that something was breaking. My hands trembled slightly as I organized the papers into chronological order. Each document was confirmation of my worst fears, but also proof that I wasn't crazy. Everything I'd suspected was real, documented, and undeniable. The preparation I'd done suddenly felt less paranoid and more necessary. I had been unconsciously preparing for this moment for months, gathering evidence without fully understanding why. My instincts had guided me toward protection before my conscious mind had admitted the truth. As I sat there in the darkness, surrounded by the evidence of Lauren's infidelity, I felt a strange sense of peace. At least now I knew the truth, and the truth, no matter how painful, was something I could work with. I let my mind drift back 6 months, remembering when Lauren started changing. She'd receive text messages late at night and smile secretively, then excuse herself to answer calls. She started going out more, claiming she needed girl time. Her credit card bills showed expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of. She became distant, wrapped up in her own world, less interested in my day or us. When I tried to talk about the growing distance, she'd shut me down, saying I was being clingy and paranoid. I remember one night in particular, I found a hotel receipt in her jacket pocket. When I asked about it, she said it was from a work event, but her company had no record of it. I didn't push the issue then. I'd simply started organizing everything into that folder, deciding to watch and wait instead. I was becoming a detective in my own marriage, tracking evidence instead of confronting her directly. The pain of knowing was worse than the shock of learning would have been. My suspicions had grown into certainties, piece by piece. Looking back, I realized that every small lie had been a brick in the wall between us. I should have confronted her then, but perhaps this path was meant to lead me somewhere better. Every warning sign I'd ignored now seemed so obvious, so glaring in its obviousness. I wondered how many times I'd walked past the truth without truly seeing it. The day I decided to see an attorney, I felt both terrified and oddly calm. I drove to a downtown office building and rode the elevator to the 3rd floor. The lawyer's name was Patricia Monroe, and she was known for being sharp and fair. I explained everything: my suspicions, the receipts, the odd behavior. Then I brought out the postnuptial agreement. Lauren had actually suggested it years ago, thinking it would protect her interests. But Patricia looked at it carefully and smiled. She explained that the agreement had a clause protecting whoever remained faithful in the marriage. If infidelity occurred, that spouse forfeited significant assets. Lauren had written her own downfall into a legal document and never realized it. Patricia helped me understand what I could do and what the law would support. I left that office feeling like I finally had armor. For the first time, I felt like I had control. The law was on my side, and I had documentation to prove everything. Patricia's confidence gave me hope. She had seen countless cases like mine, and she assured me that I was in an exceptionally strong position. Her expertise became my greatest ally in the battle ahead. As I walked down the hallway of that law office, I felt something shift inside me. The victim narrative I'd been living had suddenly transformed. I wasn't a man being abandoned, I was a man preparing for victory. While I was learning about my legal position, the real Blake Thornton was being revealed through people who actually knew him. A friend of mine, Marcus, worked in the investment world and knew Blake's reputation well. Over coffee one afternoon, Marcus told me the truth. Blake was flashy and arrogant, the kind of guy who dated women for status and dumped them when something shinier came along. He'd had several failed ventures and was always chasing the next big deal. Meanwhile, Lauren was posting photos on social media, her and Blake at luxury condos, fancy restaurants, expensive clubs. Each photo felt like a small cut, but I reminded myself that what glitters isn't always gold. Marcus warned me that Blake had left 3 previous girlfriends financially devastated. He'd promised them the world, then disappeared when they realized his promises were empty. Lauren was walking into a trap that had already ensnared countless women before her. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness knowing her downfall was inevitable and predictable. Marcus also mentioned that Blake owed significant money to various creditors, a detail that would become important later. I stored that information away, knowing it might prove valuable in understanding the complete picture of Lauren's choice. The irony wasn't lost on me. Lauren had abandoned financial stability for financial chaos. She traded the known for the unknown, the real for the imaginary. 3 weeks after she left, Lauren tried to make a move on our finances. She sent a request to withdraw $50,000 from our joint account. I got the notification immediately. Here's where my preparation paid off. The month before she left, I'd quietly moved most of our liquid assets to separate accounts that required both signatures. The withdrawal failed. She tried again and got the same result. That evening, her angry text arrived. "What did you do with the money?" I responded exactly as Patricia had coached me. Consult with your attorney regarding asset division. No emotion. No explanation. Just facts. Lauren fired back with rage, calling me selfish and cruel. But I knew the truth. She discovered I wasn't the easy target she'd assumed. I was one step ahead of her, and that realization terrified her. Her texts became increasingly frantic, but every message was recorded and documented. She was beginning to understand the extent of my preparation. Each failed attempt to access the money made her more desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. I was counting on her desperation to reveal the truth about her situation with Blake. The financial isolation was working exactly as I'd planned. She was running out of options, and her panic was becoming visible in every message she sent. Exactly 2 days after she left, my phone rang at 11:47 p.m. Lauren was sobbing, her words tumbling over each other. Blake wasn't who he'd pretended to be. He was controlling, demanding, and secretive. She'd found out through a news article that one of his investments had collapsed, leaving investors with significant losses. She'd realized, too late, that she'd left a decent life for a man built on empty promises. She was begging me to take her back, crying that she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. I listened to every word, and I felt nothing. No joy at her suffering. No desire to rescue her. Just clarity. She wasn't calling because she loved me or realized she'd made a terrible mistake about our relationship. She was calling because her backup plan had failed. Her tears weren't about losing me, they were about losing security. That distinction made all the difference. The mask had finally slipped, revealing the truth underneath. She had thought Blake would be her escape from our marriage. Instead, she'd escaped from safety into a nightmare. Now she wanted back in not because she loved me, but because I represented the security she'd foolishly thrown away. I understood then that some people only appreciate what they have once they've lost it. But appreciation without genuine remorse is just desperation in disguise. I let her crying fade into silence before I spoke. My voice came out calm and even, which seemed to shake her more than anger would have. I told her that I'd filed for divorce the morning after she left. The papers were already in motion. I reminded her about the post-nuptial agreement, the one she'd insisted on and been so proud of negotiating. I explained that because she'd committed infidelity, she had forfeited the protections she thought she'd secured. She tried to interrupt, but I kept going. I told her that my attorney had documented everything, that I had receipts, bank statements, hotel bills, and phone records showing exactly where she'd been and who she'd been with. When I finished speaking, she was silent. She'd expected anger, or maybe pain, or someone desperate enough to compromise. She hadn't expected calm, calculated preparation. Her silence confirmed she finally understood the gravity of her situation. Every word I'd spoken was like a closing door between us. She was realizing that her actions had consequences far greater than she'd ever anticipated. The realization hit her hard, and there was nothing she could say that would change what was already set in motion. I could almost hear the moment her hope died, replaced by the cold understanding of her reality. The next evening, Lauren showed up at the house without calling. Her eyes were red and puffy, her expensive clothes looking suddenly cheap and desperate. She was crying and begging, asking to come inside. I opened the door just wide enough to see her clearly, but I didn't let her in. She tried to push past me, but I stepped forward instead, blocking the doorway. She looked smaller than I remembered. She talked about the years we'd shared, the plans we'd made, the future we were supposed to have. Her voice broke as she spoke about wanting to come home. I listened without expression, letting her words hang in the cool evening air. When she finished, I simply said, "Goodbye, Lauren," and closed the door. I heard her crying from outside, heard her calling my name. Standing at the kitchen window, I watched her slump against the porch railing, shoulders shaking with sobs. Part of me wanted to open that door. But that part had died when she chose Blake. She needed to understand that some doors, once closed, don't open again. I realized in that moment that I had already moved on emotionally, even though the legal process was just beginning. Her suffering didn't bring me joy, but it also didn't bring me back. Watching her cry outside my house, I felt only a deep sadness for the waste of it all. Within days, Lauren started spreading stories about me to mutual friends. She told anyone who would listen that I'd been distant and unambitious, that I'd never supported her dreams. She painted herself as a victim of my neglect. Instead of defending myself with anger, I responded with facts. When friends asked me directly, I calmly showed them the evidence. I showed them the timeline, the dates, the evidence of her infidelity. What surprised me was how quickly people's loyalty shifted. Friends who'd been sympathetic to Lauren suddenly understood what had actually happened. The narrative she'd constructed crumbled under the weight of evidence. People started asking how I was doing instead of asking why I'd pushed her away. One friend, Tom, told me later that seeing the evidence had been a wake-up call. The truth, when presented clearly and without emotion, had the power to change minds and restore understanding. People began to see me not as the villain in her story, but as the victim of her betrayal. What amazed me most was how quickly the truth reshaped public perception. Lauren's version of events couldn't survive contact with documented facts. The community that had been sympathetic to her sudden departure now saw her for what she truly was. I realized that people generally want to believe the truth if it's presented clearly enough. They don't want to be lied to, and once they understand they've been manipulated, their sympathy vanishes. Lauren's attorney tried to contest the post-nuptial agreement, arguing that it was unfair. My lawyer, Patricia, handled the response beautifully. She carefully laid out the agreement point by point, showing the fidelity clause Lauren herself had insisted on. She argued that Lauren couldn't claim the agreement was unfair simply because she'd broken her own terms. The judge agreed completely. The law was on my side, not because I'd manipulated it, but because Lauren had created her own legal prison. Every hearing, every motion, every response highlighted how thoroughly I'd been prepared. Lauren's attorney's tone shifted over time, becoming less aggressive and more resigned. They could see the uphill battle they faced. The system was working exactly as designed. The judge's ruling was decisive and left no room for appeal or further argument. Justice, it seemed, was finally on my side. The courtroom victory felt validating, but I realized it was only the beginning of a longer journey toward healing and closure. The law had protected me, but I still needed time to heal the emotional wounds. Each legal victory was a brick in the foundation of my new life. I was rebuilding myself brick by brick, victory by victory. I submitted everything to the court in perfect order. Chronological proof of her communications with Blake, hotel receipts, bank statements, phone records. I even had text screenshots showing her dismissive attitude toward our marriage. I wasn't vengeful, I was just thorough. Each piece of evidence was clearly labeled, dated, and explained. There was no drama, no emotional commentary, just facts arranged logically. Looking at everything compiled together, the pattern was unmistakable. Lauren's attorney reviewed it all and realized there was no argument left to make. The evidence was overwhelming and completely legitimate. They stopped pushing for contested assets and began preparing for settlement discussions. I'd won before we ever got to trial. The weight of documentation had made my victory certain before we ever entered the courtroom. Every detail mattered, and every detail favored me completely. I had been meticulous in my documentation, never exaggerating, never including hearsay, just cold hard facts. That discipline had paid off in the most important way possible. The judge noted in his ruling that he'd rarely seen such comprehensive and well-organized evidence. He commended my attorney's presentation and my own methodical preparation. Then Lauren tried a different approach. She asked for a private meeting without attorneys. I agreed, but had Patricia wait in a nearby office. Lauren came on a rainy afternoon, and this time she wasn't angry or demanding. She apologized deeply, with tears streaming down her face. She said she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd been confused and scared of aging. She asked for another chance, talking about reconciliation and starting over. I listened to every word, and I almost believed her sincerity. Almost. But I saw the truth underneath her tears. She wasn't grieving our lost marriage. She was grieving her lost security. She'd burned through Blake's promises and found nothing solid. Now she wanted to come back to the one thing she knew was stable. That wasn't love. It was survival dressed up in pretty words. I understood her desperation, but I couldn't allow myself to be used as her safety net. She needed to learn that actions have consequences, and those consequences couldn't be erased by tears and apologies. My compassion didn't extend to enabling her escape from the consequences of her choices. I explained to her that rebuilding a marriage required more than apologies. It required genuine transformation, accountability, and a complete restructuring of values. She had none of those things to offer. A few days after that meeting, my boss called me into his office and offered me a promotion, senior leadership, significant raise, corner office. He told me that during all the personal chaos I'd been dealing with, I'd somehow managed to secure our biggest client renewal. He said most people would have fallen apart, but I'd actually performed better under stress. I accepted the promotion, grateful and understanding what it represented. My life was moving forward without Lauren. While she was spiraling, I was ascending. While she was trying to rebuild what she'd destroyed, I was building something new and better. That promotion proved I didn't need her to be successful or complete. I was enough on my own. The promotion symbolized a new chapter, one where I was thriving independently. My professional success became a source of genuine pride, proof that I had value and capability beyond my marriage. The raise also meant financial independence that felt empowering and liberating. I realized that success was the best response to betrayal. Every achievement was a statement that I would not be broken by her choices. The public exposure of Blake came quickly. News articles started appearing about his investment scheme. Several investors filed complaints, alleging that Blake had misrepresented his returns and hidden financial losses. The respectable businessman image he'd cultivated started cracking. Worse for Lauren, her social media association with him became embarrassing. The expensive restaurant photos and luxury condo pictures now looked like evidence of her poor judgment. Friends she tried to impress quietly distanced themselves. The social status she'd sought had turned to toxicity. She'd traded a solid, honest life for a man built on empty promises. I felt no satisfaction watching her reputation crumble. It was simply the inevitable consequence of her choices unfolding exactly as predicted. Her associations became her undoing, and there was nothing she could do to escape them. The irony was that she'd wanted to climb the social ladder, only to discover that the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. Everyone who'd envied her position now pitted her for her poor judgment. The public nature of Blake's downfall meant that Lauren's mistake was visible to everyone. There was no escaping it, no hiding from it. She had chosen poorly, and the world was watching her pay the price. 3 months into the process, my attorney suggested mediation. Lauren's side had proposed it, hoping that sitting down together might soften my resolve. I agreed to mediation, but not because I expected Lauren to change my mind. A quick resolution benefited me more than her. I arrived prepared with documents, numbers, and Patricia. Lauren arrived with emotions and memories. When she began talking about our shared history, I simply slid settlement documents across the table. Numbers don't argue. They don't cry. They don't appeal to sentiment. They just exist, cold and factual. My proposal was fair but firm. There was no room for negotiation or compromise. She needed to understand that this was the reality she faced, regardless of her emotional appeals. The mediator understood immediately that this case wasn't going to be resolved through sentiment or compromise. The facts were too damning, the evidence too overwhelming. I maintained complete composure throughout, never allowing emotion to influence my decisions. My consistency was its own form of power. The mediation session itself was almost painful to watch. Lauren tried emotional manipulation, speaking about our wedding day and the dreams we'd shared. I remained silent, letting her words fill the room and disappear into nothing. When she finally asked how I could throw away 10 years, I responded by sliding across documents, bank statements showing her infidelity, hotel receipts, phone records, credit card charges. I pointed out specific dates, times, and amounts. I showed the timeline of her deception with the same calm I'd shown everything else. The mediator looked between us, understanding clearly what had happened. Lauren's face changed as she stared at the evidence of her betrayal arranged before her. She tried to explain some of it away, but there is no context that makes infidelity understandable to someone you've betrayed. The evidence spoke louder than any words could. Every receipt had a story, every phone record had a conversation, every bank statement had a secret rendezvous. The truth was impossible to deny or minimize. She realized finally that no amount of talking would change the facts arrayed before her. Lauren made one final push during that mediation. She leaned forward, eyes pleading, 10 years can't mean nothing. We can't just throw away 10 years. I looked at her and felt genuine sadness. Not for us, but for what we'd lost. I responded quietly, you threw away 10 years when you chose Blake. 10 years meant nothing to you then. I'm just accepting what you've already decided. She was speechless. There's power in truth spoken calmly. She wanted me to match her emotional intensity. But I kept my composure, my facts, my clarity. She'd made choices, and choices have consequences. The mediator called for a break, and I stepped outside to breathe. The conversation had reached its natural conclusion, with nothing left to say that mattered. I felt the weight lifting slightly with each passing moment. The worst was behind me now, and whatever came next would be easier. Standing outside in the cool afternoon air, I felt the first real stirrings of peace. When we reconvened, I explained my perspective one final time. I told her that her grief wasn't about losing me or losing our marriage. It was about losing security. She'd gambled everything on Blake and lost. She was trying to reclaim what she'd discarded, not because she loved me, but because I represented safety and stability. I explained that rebuilding trust requires genuine remorse and complete honesty, and what I'd seen from her was neither. She was sorry she'd been caught, sorry Blake had failed, sorry her social status had crumbled. But she wasn't sorry she'd left. If Blake had remained wealthy and stable, she'd still be with him today. That truth couldn't be unspoken. She finally understood that redemption wasn't possible without true change of heart. I wasn't interested in false reconciliation or surface-level apologies. I needed real change, and she wasn't capable of providing it. The mediator acknowledged that the settlement was fair and legally sound. I had made my position clear, and there was nothing more to discuss. The path forward was set, and I was ready to walk it alone. The promotion was officially finalized the same week the divorce papers were signed. I walked into my new corner office on a Monday morning and saw the nameplate already on the door. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very week Lauren was signing away her future security was the week my future was being secured and expanded. I'd presented my team with a new strategy, and they'd responded with energy and commitment. We'd landed a major account because of my planning and execution. My boss made a comment about how some people crumble under pressure, but the best people rise to the challenge. I knew he was right. I'd been tested, and I'd come through stronger than ever before. The promotion represented my resilience and determination. Standing in that corner office, I felt the weight of everything I'd endured finally beginning to lift. The view from that window represented my victory, not over Lauren, but over the circumstances that had tried to break me. I realized that my success had nothing to do with Lauren or her choices. It was entirely my own creation. That realization was more powerful than any revenge could have been. The public scandal surrounding Blake intensified dramatically. Investigators began looking into his entire operation. News reports named him as the subject of a federal inquiry. His assets were frozen. His company shut down. And there, in every article about Blake's downfall, was Lauren's name. People asked questions about her involvement. She hadn't benefited, but the association alone was damaging. The social status she'd sought had turned to toxicity. People who'd seen her luxury photos with Blake now saw evidence of her poor judgment. Neighbors started treating her differently. The life she'd chosen was crumbling in real time. She was reaping exactly what she'd sown, and the universe seemed determined to make sure she understood the consequences. The news articles mentioned her by name, linking her to Blake's fraudulent activities. She tried to distance herself from him, but the damage was already done. Public perception, once shaped, is nearly impossible to reshape. I watched from a distance as her world collapsed, feeling neither joy nor sadness, just a quiet acknowledgement of natural consequences playing out. The night before the divorce was officially finalized, Lauren called me one last time. No anger, just desperation. She asked if there was really no way back, if I would never consider reconciliation. She said she understood now that she'd made a mistake. She promised she would be different and would spend whatever time it took earning back my trust. I understood that she was suffering. But suffering wasn't the same as redemption. She was suffering consequences, not experiencing true change. I listened to her entire plea without interrupting. When she finished, I told her the truth, that what she'd done couldn't be undone, that trust once broken rarely rebuilds, and that I'd already begun healing without her. She needed to understand that some choices cannot be reversed. I genuinely hoped she would find a way to rebuild her life, but that rebuilding wouldn't include me. She had to walk that path alone. I ended the call with kindness but finality. There was nothing more to say between us. When the judge signed off on the divorce papers the next day, I felt relief. Not triumph or vindication. Just relief. The chapter was closed. Lauren left the courthouse with significantly less than she'd hoped for: limited alimony, no claim to my retirement accounts, no interest in the house or business investments. She'd forfeited almost everything due to the post-nuptial agreement. The irony was perfect and complete. I walked out with Patricia, and I didn't feel angry or satisfied or victorious. I felt free. Free from wondering about her. Free from the weight of loving someone who didn't love me back. Free to build something new. The legal battle was finally over, and I had emerged victorious and whole. I realized that this freedom was the greatest victory of all. Money and assets could be regained, but freedom of the spirit was precious beyond measure. Walking down the courthouse steps, I felt lighter than I had in years. The divorce finalization marked a turning point. With Lauren completely out of my life, I discovered something surprising. I liked who I was becoming. I was confident at work. I was peaceful at home. I started spending time with friends who genuinely cared about me. I joined a gym and stuck with it. I redecorated my house, creating a space that reflected who I was now. I started reading again. I even went on a few dates, nothing serious, just exploration. The house that had felt empty now felt full of possibility. Every change I made was a step toward my new life, away from the pain of the past. I began to understand that healing wasn't a destination but a journey of small, consistent choices. Each day brought me closer to the person I was meant to become. My therapist helped me understand that I'd been carrying blame and shame that wasn't mine to carry. Learning to let that go was liberating. 1 year after Lauren walked out, I stood in my corner office looking over the city. The company had promoted me again. I was leading a team of talented people who respected my leadership. My consulting firm had expanded to 3 new offices. The house had been fully renovated and felt like a home again. I developed a genuine friendship with someone I'd met through work, nothing serious yet, but something real and honest and built on mutual respect. And Lauren? I heard through mutual friends that she'd moved into a small apartment and was working a regular job, trying to rebuild her life from scratch. She'd learned that shortcuts don't exist. That choosing money over substance leaves you with nothing. She thought leaving me was an upgrade. Turns out I was the real upgrade all along. I had won, not through revenge, but through living better. The best response to betrayal was building a life so good that I didn't have time to think about those who'd hurt me. My success was my greatest victory, not because I was proving anything to Lauren, but because I was finally becoming the person I was meant to be. Looking back on everything, I understood that the pain had been necessary. It had stripped away illusions and forced me to build something real. I wouldn't change a thing.